The roast was dry. Not slightly dry, the way a turkey gets when somebody forgets to baste it. Dry the way old paper is dry. I pushed it around my plate with the side of my fork and listened to my son's wife laugh at something her sister had said across the table, and I thought, well, here we are again. I was sitting in the chair closest to the kitchen door, the one with the wobbly leg. My son had set me there an hour earlier with a quick pat on my shoulder, the way you'd shoo a cat off a couch, and I'd let him because I'd driven 200 miles that afternoon and I was tired and I didn't want to start anything. That's the phrase I've been using with myself for about 6 years now. I don't want to start anything. I'd say it in the car on the way home from their house. I'd say it when my granddaughter ignored me at her birthday party. I'd say it in the bathroom mirror at 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. The platter in the middle of the table held a roast the size of a small dog. My son's wife had announced when I walked in that they'd splurged on prime rib because her parents were coming. Her parents weren't coming, as it turned out. They'd called to cancel about an hour before dinner. But the roast was already in the oven, and so we ate it. The 4 of us, my son, his wife, my grandson, who's almost 11 and barely looks up from his tablet anymore, and me. Except they ate it. I got what was left when the platter came around. A few thin slices from the very end, the brown bark part, the part nobody really wants, and a spoonful of green beans that had gone past green into army green. The mashed potatoes never made it down to my end. I'd brought a pecan pie. I baked it that morning before I drove. It was sitting on the counter behind me, still in its tin. The foil I'd wrapped around it for the drive folded back like a shucked husk. Nobody had said thank you for it. Nobody had asked about the drive. My son's wife, whose name I will not say in this telling because frankly I am tired of saying it, was describing a kitchen renovation. The countertops alone were going to cost $18,000. She wanted Calacatta marble. My son was nodding along and pouring himself more wine. The good wine, the kind in the bottle with the wax-dipped top, the kind I'd noticed on the table because I noticed everything by then, even when I pretended I didn't. "Mom, you'd love it," my son said, not really looking at me. "It's going to be gorgeous." I smiled. The smile I'd been wearing for so many years it had grooves in my face like a wedding ring leaves on a finger. "It sounds expensive," I said. "Well, you only do it once," my daughter-in-law said. She speared a piece of meat off the platter and didn't pass it. "We figured we deserve it." That word. Deserve. It sat in the air between us like a fly that wouldn't land. I want to tell you that something snapped in me right then. That some lightning bolt of clarity struck me at that ugly oak table in that ugly open-concept dining room with the recessed lights too bright on the top of my head. But it didn't happen that way. What happened was much quieter. What happened was that I looked down at my plate, at those 3 dry brown slivers of meat, and I thought about the check I had written 6 weeks earlier. $12,000. For my grandson's private school deposit. They'd called me on a Sunday afternoon, both of them on speakerphone, talking over each other. The school had a deadline. The wait list was tight. They'd pay me back when the bonus came through in March. Of course they would. The check had cleared on a Tuesday. They had not, as of that Tuesday or any Tuesday since, mentioned the bonus, or March, or the money. I'd written a lot of those checks. I'd been writing them off and on for 19 years, since my husband died, and they realized, though they would never have said it out loud, not even to each other, that the insurance policy and the pension and the house I'd sold and the savings he and I had stitched together over 41 years of careful living had all landed, every penny of it, in my name. The numbers, when you add them up over 19 years, are not small numbers. I'm a retired bookkeeper. I know exactly what they are. I'd written them down in a green ledger I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk at home. Not because I was building a case. I wasn't. Not then. Not consciously. But because the part of me that used to balance a payroll for a manufacturing company in 3 states couldn't help herself. I logged it the way a nurse logs vitals. Each transfer, each tuition check, each "just this one thing, Mom." each emergency car repair, each down payment on a house I had never been invited inside, without an appointment. That night at the dinner table, sitting there with my dry meat and my olive drab beans, I thought about the green ledger. And I thought about the pie cooling behind me on the counter. And I thought about the drive home in the morning, the 200 miles back to my own kitchen, my own quiet, my own bed, and I smiled the wedding ring smile and I said, "May I have a little more of the meat, please?" My son's wife looked at the platter, then she looked at me. "Oh," she said, "there isn't much left. Why don't you finish what you have?" My son didn't say anything. He picked up his wine glass and he sipped from it, and he didn't say anything at all. It was the not saying that did it, not her. Him. I want you to understand something. I had been the one who sat up with that man, my son, when he had croup at 3 years old and couldn't breathe right, and we had to take him into the bathroom and run the shower hot to steam him. I had been the one who drove him to community college every morning for 2 years after he flunked out of state because he couldn't get out of bed, and his father had screamed at him about it until I'd quietly arranged everything so he could try again. I had been the one who held his hand at his wedding because he was so nervous he was shaking, and I had whispered to him, "You are loved. You have always been loved. You will always be loved." And he sat there and sipped his wine. I excused myself from the table. I said I had a long drive in the morning and I was going to turn in. I went to the guest room that used to be my grandson's nursery and is now her home gym, with a David in the corner under the window. I lay down on the daybed in my clothes. The window faced the street, and a streetlight was pouring orange light onto my face, and I didn't get up to close the blinds. I lay there until the house was quiet. Then I sat up. I am going to tell you what I did between midnight and dawn that night, and I want you to know I am not proud of how good it felt. I am not proud that there was a sweetness to it. A clean, cold sweetness like ice water on a sore tooth. But I felt it, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I took my phone out of my purse. I opened my banking app. I opened the credit card I'd added them to 14 years ago, when he was first married, when I'd said, "Here, take this, in case of an emergency." The one I'd added her to 4 years later because she'd asked, sweetly, with her head tilted just so, just in case. The one that had paid for the trip to Hawaii 2 summers ago that I had not been invited on. The one that had paid for the dog. The one that had paid for the patio furniture I had seen in their backyard and not been told about. I clicked the little gear icon. I clicked Manage Authorized Users. I removed her. I removed him. It took about 40 seconds. Then I opened the other card. The one I'd let him put gas on for years. The one she used at Target. I removed them from that one too. Then I called the customer service line for my checking account, and I asked them to remove the automatic transfer that had been going from my account to his every first of the month for the last 7 years. Allowance. He'd called it once, joking, a long time ago when he'd been laid off. It had never been canceled. I had never canceled it. I had let it run for 7 years. And it had paid for, well, I don't know what it had paid for. Wine in bottles with wax tops, probably. Marble countertops eventually. The woman on the line was very kind. She said, "Ma'am, can I ask why?" I said, "I just don't need to send it anymore." She said, "All right, ma'am. That'll be effective immediately." I sat on the edge of the daybed and the orange streetlight was still on my face and I thought, well, now what? Then I thought about the green ledger. I called my lawyer's after-hours line and I left a message. I said, "This is your client. Please call me first thing in the morning. I need to make changes to my will and I need to make them today." My lawyer is a good man. His father was my husband's best friend. He'd call. I knew he'd call. I called my financial advisor's after-hours line too. I asked her to freeze the joint investment account my son was a signer on, the one his father had set up years and years ago, with the idea that someday it would become his and his sister's. "Pause it," I said. I'm not sure yet what I want to do, but I don't want anyone moving anything until I'm sure. That was the first time that night that I let myself think the word sister. I have a daughter. You wouldn't know it from the way I've been talking, would you? She has been so absent from this story that you might have forgotten, the way I had been allowing myself to forget, the way the family had taught itself to forget. My daughter lives in a small town in eastern Tennessee. She is 2 years younger than my son. She is a veterinarian. She has not spoken to her brother since their father's funeral, and not really to me since about 2 years after that. There was a fight. I won't go into it here. I will say that I took my son's side, because that is what I had been doing for so long that it was the only thing I knew how to do. And my daughter, who had never asked me for one single dollar, never once in her whole adult life, drove back to Tennessee that night and stopped picking up when I called. I sent her a card every Christmas. She sent one back every other year or so. Hope you're well, Mom. Love, your daughter. I sat on the daybed at 1 a.m. in my son's house with the streetlight in my eyes, and I picked up my phone and I scrolled to her name and I called her. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was thick with sleep. Mom? Are you okay? I said. I'm at your brother's house. They gave me the burnt end of the roast. I drove 200 miles and I baked them a pie and nobody ate it. And I'm sitting in the dark and I don't know what I'm doing, honey. I don't know what I've been doing. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear a dog snoring somewhere in the room with her. Mom, she said finally. Where are you exactly? The guest room. The one that's a gym now. Pack your bag, go to a hotel. It's the middle of the night. Mom, pack your bag, go to a hotel. It's the middle of the night. Mom, pack your bag. There's a Hampton Inn off the freeway. I just looked. Go there. Call me when you check in. So I did. I packed my little overnight bag, the one I'd brought, with my one nightgown I had not put on, and my toothbrush still dry. I wrote a note. I left it on the kitchen counter next to the pecan pie. The note said, I drove home early. Eat the pie. I didn't sign it. I let myself out the front door at 1:40 in the morning, and I started my car, and I drove the 11 minutes to the Hampton Inn off exit 47. The young man at the desk had a kind face and didn't ask me any questions. I checked in. I went to my room on the 3rd floor. It smelled faintly like chlorine from the pool somewhere downstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed and I called my daughter back and I cried. Finally, I cried for about 20 minutes. The kind of crying where you don't make any noise because you forgot how, and my daughter just stayed on the line and didn't say anything, and her dog snored, and that snoring 2 states away was the kindest sound I had heard in years. When I could talk again, I told her what I'd done. The cards, the transfer, the lawyer, the advisor. She said, Mom, are you sure? I said, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. She said, okay. Then I'm coming. I said, honey, no, you don't have to. She said, Mom, I'm coming. I'll be there by noon. Stay in the hotel. Order room service. I'll meet you. We hung up. I lay back on the hotel bed in my clothes, and I watched the ceiling, and I waited for the sun to come up. It came up at 6:43. At 7:02, my phone rang. It was my son. I let it ring. He called again at 7:05. At 7:11, at 7:19, at 7:26, my daughter-in-law called. I didn't answer any of them. I got up and I went down to the lobby and I poured myself a cup of the bad hotel coffee and I took a hard-boiled egg from the breakfast spread and I sat at one of those little round tables by the window and I watched the parking lot fill up with people going to work, going somewhere, getting on with their lives, and I ate the egg slowly. My phone buzzed with a text. From my son. Mom, the card got declined at the gas station. Can you call the bank? I think it got flagged by mistake. Another text. Mom, another. Mom. The other one is also declined. Vanessa is at the grocery store. Please call them. He hadn't said her name in any of the texts about the school check. He hadn't said her name in any of the texts about anything I'd paid for in years. But here she was, suddenly. Vanessa is at the grocery store, like I was supposed to leap to my feet for Vanessa. The fourth text came at 7:58. Mom, what is going on? Where are you? The auto-pay didn't hit our checking either. We have to be at Mason School in an hour. And the field trip check bounced. A bounced field trip check. Not a hospital. Not a fire. A field trip. I took a sip of the bad coffee. Then I typed, slowly, with both thumbs the way I always have to. I am safe. I am at a hotel. I drove home early. I canceled the cards and the auto-pay last night. I will call you when I am ready. I love you. Mom. I read it twice. I added one more line. Please do not call me until I call you. I hit send. I turned my phone face down on the table. I finished the egg. He called 19 times in the next 2 hours. He left voicemails I did not listen to. He sent a text that said, Mom, this is insane. We have bills. He sent a text that said, Did Sherry put you up to this? That was my daughter's name, Sherry. He hadn't said it out loud in 7 years. I turned the phone all the way off. At 11:58, a knock came at my hotel room door. I was up there by then, packing my little bag, because I had decided I wasn't going to drive home at all. I had decided I was going to drive to Tennessee instead. I opened the door. My daughter is 48 years old. She has my mother's nose. She had a scrunchie holding back her hair, and she was wearing the kind of fleece pullover that veterinarians wear, the navy blue one with her clinic's logo on the chest. And she had driven through the night, and her eyes were red, and she did not say a word. She just stepped forward and put her arms around me, and she held on, and I held on, and we stood there in the doorway of room 312 of a Hampton Inn off exit 47, and we held each other for what must have been a full minute. When she finally let go, she said, I brought you a coffee from a real place. It's in the car. I laughed. The laugh came up out of me from somewhere I hadn't visited in a long time. She drove. I had not let anyone else drive my car in 19 years. I sat in the passenger seat, and I let my daughter drive me away from that town, and that house, and that table, and that platter, and I watched the strip malls, and the gas stations, and the billboards slide by. And at some point, I fell asleep. And when I woke up, we were in Kentucky, and the air smelled different, like grass, and old rain. And she said, We're stopping for lunch in about 10 minutes. You hungry? I said, I think I'm starving. Actually, we stopped at a diner where the waitress called us both Han, and the coffee was hot and the meatloaf was good, and I ate every bite of it. My son finally got through to me 3 days later. By then, I was at my daughter's house, in her guest room, which is actually a guest room, with curtains and a real bed and a lamp. My daughter said had been my mother's, that she had taken from the storage unit after Dad died because nobody else wanted it. I had not known she had it. I had thought it was lost. When he called, I took a breath and I picked up. Mom, he said, we need to talk. All right, I said. You can't just, Vanessa hasn't slept, Mom. The mortgage didn't pull. The card for Mason's tutoring got declined in front of the tutor. Do you understand what you've done? I waited. I have learned in 3 days the power of waiting. He said, Are you there? I'm here. Mom. Say something. I said, I'm going to tell you something now, and I'm going to say it once, and I am going to say it once, and I am going to say it once, and I am not going to repeat it or argue about it. Are you listening? He didn't answer. I said, I have been paying for your life for 19 years. I have done it because I loved you and because your father loved you and because somewhere in there I confused the two things, loving someone and paying for them. They are not the same thing. I am not going to pay for you anymore. Not the cards. Not the auto pay, not the tuition, not the tutoring, not the down payment on the next thing or the renovation or the school or the dog. I am not punishing you. I am stopping. There is a difference and you will figure it out eventually or you will not. I could hear him breathing. I could hear in the background his wife saying, What is she saying? What is she saying? I said, I gave a piece of meat the size of my thumb at your dinner table on Saturday night, and you watched, and you did not say one single word. I have thought about that for 3 days. I'm going to think about it for a long time. I want you to think about it too. When you have thought about it for a while, you can call me, but not to talk about money. Don't ever call me about money again. He said, Mom. I said, I love you. I always will. Goodbye, honey. I hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I had to set the phone on the bedside table and just look at them for a minute. The skin on the backs of them is thin now, the way old skin gets, mapped over with little blue rivers. I looked at those hands and I thought about everything they had done, diapers and dish soap and check after check after check. 41 years of marriage and 19 years of widowhood. A pecan pie at 6 in the morning. A note on a kitchen counter at 1:40. My daughter knocked on the door. You good? I'm good, I said. And I was. I really was. I stayed in Tennessee for 6 weeks. We went on walks. I helped at the clinic on Saturdays, held the cats while she gave their shots. The way I used to hold my own children when they got theirs. I met her neighbors. I met a man at the farmer's market, a widower, who asked me very politely if I'd like to have coffee sometime. I said maybe. I haven't said yes yet. I haven't said no. My son emailed me eventually. A long email. Not an apology. Not quite. But not a demand either. He said he was talking to somebody, a counselor, and that his wife was furious with me, but that he said, trying to think about Saturday night. He said his sister had called him for the first time in years, and that they had talked for 2 hours and that he had cried. I wrote back. Short. I said I loved him, and that I was glad he was thinking, and that I would see him at Christmas if he wanted, on neutral ground, just the two of us, no wives, no children, no platters. He wrote back within an hour. He said yes. I drove home in the middle of October. The leaves were starting. I drove with the windows down for part of it and the radio low. I came up my own driveway and I stood in my own kitchen and I made myself a real dinner. A piece of fish and some rice and a salad, and I sat at my own table by the window and I ate it slowly and I lit a candle for nobody but myself and I thought, this is what a woman my age is supposed to do. Sit at her own table. Eat her own dinner. Light her own candle. I am 68 years old. I have spent a great many of those years trying to earn a place at tables that did not want to seat me. I am done with that now. I am not bitter, and I am not finished. I am just done with the part of my life that confused love with leftovers. If you are sitting at a table somewhere right now, and somebody is handing you the burnt end and keeping the good cut for themselves, if they have been doing it for years, if you have been telling yourself it doesn't matter, if you have been writing checks they don't thank you for and showing up to dinners they don't notice you at, listen to me. Get up, pack your bag, drive to the hotel off exit 47, call the person you have not called in 7 years, eat the meatloaf at the diner. Look at the backs of your hands and remember everything they have done. You do not have to set the whole house on fire. You just have to walk out of it. The cards stop on their own. I've been thinking, in the weeks since I drove home from Tennessee, about how a thing this big can build itself out of pieces this small. Nobody set out to humiliate me at that table. Caleb didn't wake up on Saturday morning planning to give his mother the burnt end of a roast. Tessa didn't write a list called ways to make her feel small. It wasn't a plan. It was a habit. And habits, I have learned, are the most dangerous things in a family because nobody notices them until they have hollowed out the floor underneath you. I built that habit too. I want to be honest about that. Every check I wrote without a conversation, every time I drove 200 miles and said nothing about the drive, every time I smiled the wedding ring smile and let a comment go. I was teaching my son and his wife how to treat me. I was the first author of that dinner table. The dryness of the meat in my mouth on Saturday night was a thing I had been baking for 19 years. One quiet swallow at a time. That is the part I cannot give back to anyone else. The cause was partly mine. And so the change had to be mine too. Nobody was going to come rescue me from a life I had been quietly furnishing for myself. What I want to say to whoever is listening to me right now is that there are 3 things I have had to learn very late, and I want to leave them here in case they are useful to you. The first is that being good is not the same as being a doormat. I confused those two for a long time. I thought a good mother gave and never kept score. But not keeping score is different from pretending the score isn't there. The score was there. It was in a green ledger in my bottom drawer. My body knew it. My sleep knew it. Pretending I didn't was not goodness. It was something closer to fear, wearing goodness as a costume. The second is that wisdom is mostly the willingness to look at what you already know. I knew about Saturday's dinner long before Saturday. I knew the first time I drove home and cried in a rest stop bathroom 3 years ago. I knew when I stopped being invited inside the house without an appointment. Knowing isn't the hard part. Looking at what you know is the hard part. That's the work. Most of growing up, even at 68, is just deciding to look. And the third is that strength, the real kind, is much quieter than I was raised to believe. I always thought strength meant raising your voice, slamming a door, cutting someone off with a speech. The strongest thing I have ever done was sit in a Hampton Inn breakfast room at 7 in the morning and eat a hard-boiled egg slowly while my phone buzzed. That was it. That was the whole thing. I didn't yell. I didn't even cry where anyone could see. I just stopped paying for a life that was eating me, and I called the daughter I had let myself lose, and I let her drive my car. The cards stopped on their own because I finally stopped feeding them. That is the only law I trust anymore. What you feed grows. What you stop feeding stops. It works on resentment, and it works on people, and it works on the long, slow theft of a woman's own life. I fed the wrong thing for 19 years. I am feeding something else now, and it is growing.